It's Daumantas Grigaravicius.
Yeah.
Did I get that?
That's about half a Bitcoin I would give you for that.
Half a Bitcoin?
Not a full one.
Half a Bitcoin is a lot of money. Daumantas, welcome to the couch. Sitting on the couch, you've joined Adyen as the head of the region for the Middle East. When I use the word payment orchestration, what does that mean in your terms, Adyen terms?
Payment orchestration is usually a layer that sits between a merchant and all of the different third parties within a payments ecosystem. The big kind of challenge that Adyen set out to change or to disrupt at the beginning was, let's take all these parts of the payments and let's bring them all under one partner. And that's what Adyen does. It takes care of the gateway, the acquiring, it controls the risk, the fraud, everything. So you just partner with one. If I arrive in Dubai and I see the Jumeirah hotel stand when we come out of the airport, and between there and the hotel, I'm already checked in and I can use my phone, or they've activated a card because my credit card was recognized as a customer. I can go there and boom, I'm in my room. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're trying to get merchants to understand. If you think you can do this solo, I don't think that that's the strategy to go.
So welcome back. Welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics with Arjun. By now, I guess you know your host. This is Arjun. But more importantly, sitting on the couch is someone whose name I have struggled to get right. So I'm going to try and get it right the first time this time, because there's a prize waiting for me if I do. It's Daumantas Grigaravicius.
Yeah.
Did I get that?
That's about half a Bitcoin I would give you for that.
Half a Bitcoin?
Not a full one.
Half a Bitcoin is a lot of money. Daumantas, welcome to the couch.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah,
right?
Really nice to be here.
And congratulations on the new role.
Yeah, thank you.
You've joined Adyen as the head of the region for the Middle East.
Yeah.
A role which was actually, till very recently, held by a very good friend of mine called Sanders, who obviously you've known.
Yeah, yeah.
And
closely.
Obviously you know about the history of Couchonomics and Adyen.
Yeah, yeah,
right? Yeah. You guys were, I guess, gracious enough to help me incubate this show 3 years ago.
Forward thinking.
Right. Well, I don't know about that, but thank you for sticking with me for the last sort of 3 to 4 years, which is great. But always good to have a new face on the couch, as they say.
Yeah.
So I guess my first question is, how does it feel in the new role?
Yeah, and firstly, like it's good to carry the tradition on. I know about the show, and me and Sander have discussed doing it, and I've seen the previous episodes, actually even in the lead up to my interview, to hear a little bit of snippets from Roland. But yeah, no, the role's been amazing. It's been very full on. It's a really busy period of time now within Adyen. But to be honest, I mean, it is what it is. I think it's a great time to come because you will learn a lot, and I can definitely confirm that has been the case. The team's been amazing. Obviously, working with Sander, who's frankly a legend within Adyen, is also a fairly privileged position. So yeah, no complaints. I think it couldn't be set up better. So yeah,
no, you're right. And I think we were talking just before you started, saying that this is quite an intense period. The year is coming to an end. Plans for next year is being made. I think in a lot of ways, it is the best time to join, right? Sure. Because it gives you the opportunity to dive straight in, right? You become a part of what's going to happen next year rather than kind of joining, a quarter in or 2 quarters in when, a lot of the, if I may say, a lot of the baking has already begun. So I think there's no better way. So Daumantas, what we're trying to, there's a lot I want to cover, right? It's hilarious, right? Payments is the original poster child for fintech, but it currently, continues to evolve and change constantly, right? And I think I was reading a very interesting JP Morgan report, which is sort of payments is eating the world, right? For me, who's been in payments for the last 15 years, every time I've actually thought that, now things are getting a little steady about payments, something new comes around and kind of disrupts the market, right? And usually the disruption is quite, if I may say, massive, because it sort of underpins economy these days, right? Payments kind of become very intrinsic to commerce, right? It's hard to kind of split it out. So if you don't mind, what we'll do is we'll start a little bit at a macro level, right? I want to kind of hear your views on what's kind of happening, right? But we'll focus ourselves to the UAE, maybe the wider region, and I know there's some interesting things that you're doing with some wider market, or bigger markets which are close by. But if you were to paint a picture today taking the Middle East and the UAE as a context, what are some of the interesting shifts and trends that you guys are seeing that you feel is defining what the market is today and, you know, for the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, frankly speaking, a lot. I think the biggest change is obviously, you know, the extreme change from spending habits, you know, the move from cash. Like everyone knows, the UAE, even when I landed in 2018, was so heavily cash. In a space of a couple of years, I remember it very well. We suddenly went from cash, cards to just everything on Apple Pay. So the speed is like insane within the UAE. Buy now, pay later exploded, and it's continuing to grow. You know, we're seeing account to account. We're seeing digital currencies move into the market, and obviously, you know, regulators like VARA being set up. Everything's very forward thinking. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot, but in some senses, it still has a lot of room to grow. And I think we see it all the time. You know, we have conversations with merchants. We can kind of see the thought process, how they view payments. And I think there's still quite a lot of differences like between some of the markets that we operate in and the UAE, which for me is exciting because, to be honest, when I was looking at Adyen from the outside in, I was like, you know, this company has got it nailed on. You know, they're winning. But the really exciting and interesting thing throughout the whole process before I joined was, there's a lot of stuff to still be done. And that's not even taking into account, you know, any other changes that are going to happen over the next few years. And then the other big thing is obviously e-commerce. You know, it's grown a lot. Big players like Noon really getting a huge market share. And that's another interesting market or part of the market that will continue to grow. And our product sits extremely nicely for that. So yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to see what will happen over the next couple of years.
No, I agree with you. And I think, you know, I think COVID did more for, if I may say, contactless or digital payments than any campaign that anyone else could come up with.
Yeah.
Unfortunate as much as that might sound in the sense of what COVID really caused. Let's do something. I'm going to try and break this down into sort of pockets of discussions, sure. Right? I myself spent about 5 years on the merchant side. That's actually how I came across Adyen or Alexander for the first time. So let's look at merchants for a second, right?
Sure.
And you know, wear your hat even from the time prior to Adyen, because you've only been with them for 3 months, right?
Yeah, of course.
Since 2018, I think when you arrived here, as you mentioned, to now, which is about, I guess, what, 6-7 years?
Yeah,
7 years,
coming
right?
to 7.
It's coming to 7 years. What are the interesting shifts that you have seen in the merchant mindset? And you know, I'd be keen to hear all sort of spectrums of merchants. The e-commerce merchants, the large conglomerates, which still have an incredible amount of offline business, right? Although it's electronic in nature, but it's offline. Yeah. And then some of the smaller merchants where actually cash still continues to play a very critical role, right? What are you seeing the interesting development, interesting changes from your vantage point?
Well, each one of those is moving at different paces, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, the well-known companies that we have here who are digital first are really tapping into the power that payments gives. You know, payments doesn't always sound extremely exciting. It's moving money from A to B. Someone makes a margin, that's it. But I think what those type of companies are noticing is that consumer demand is, I need things done quickly. I want it seamless. If there's multiple steps or something, you know, when you click it, it doesn't work, sends you back. You could lose that customer, especially with the competition there is with on-demand services or whatever. So I think they can see that user experience or payments drive user experience. Then it comes to the fact like the data that they're able to collect, or at least to see the trends of how consumers are spending, when they're not spending, and then tapping that into things like marketing, personalization. And I think that's where they really start to see the power, because they see the conversion of payments, they see higher basket sizes. That's what they're tapping into. When it comes to the big conglomerates or the big kind of incumbent retailers, I think there's still quite a bit of room for them to innovate, but you're definitely seeing you know, a shift towards e-commerce. But as you rightly said, there's still a huge amount of in-person transactions or experiences. For me, it's a pretty interesting one, because Dubai and the UAE in general is a different place now than it was in 2018. If you think about in-person payments within the UAE, people that come to Dubai, unlike any other place, going to the mall is a tourism attraction.
Yeah, it's part of life.
Yeah, exactly. In the summer, of course, we're all in the malls, and the malls are built out so you can have more than just shopping.
Yeah, they're more entertainment centers now.
Yeah. But things are changing. The city is a lot busier. That luxury feel of the malls is being challenged because there's just a lot more people. So when you go to shops, when you go to make payments, when you go to your favorite brands, there's more queues. That causes not necessarily a bad taste, but it takes away from the experience. And I think that's also an area where they're tapping into payments to see how they can tackle that.
So this is interesting, right? So let's dwell a little bit deeper on that, right? So when I was in retail, which was about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, we used to talk about the fact that actually we're bringing e-commerce in store. Yeah. Right? Because at the end of the day, what is the classification of e-commerce, right? It's remote commerce. Why can't you have remote commerce inside the stores?
Yeah.
And we were starting to see the early days of, scan and go. We had these some people were trying their luck with magic mirrors. There were these, real-time readjusting prices. We were trying all of that sort of stuff, right? Having said that, it didn't grab I guess the traction that I expected, including biometrics, right? Yeah. It didn't yes, a biometrics on Apple Pay, great, but I'm talking about biometrics in store. It still hasn't grabbed, if I may say, a significant share, right? Technology does exist. Queue busting really, really did not, for whatever reason, provide the returns that people were expecting.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was the case?
Well, biometrics, I think for me is a fairly easy one. I think it's a step too far for the time now. I think, there are people who would happily do transactions via biometrics, but I think a lot of other people would still be a bit like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to give this away and etc. So I feel like that's one aspect. The queue busting, and it's interesting, I was talking to the team about this because we were looking at our strategy within retail. Queue busting is quite specific. How many shops do you see where the queues are so large that it would warrant queue busting? Only if there's maybe an exclusive launch. Let's say you have a gaming merchant, they release a new game, whether it's FIFA or GTA or whatever. They do it at midnight, and then there's 200 people out there, waiting for it. There's a use case, but it's niche. It's not a Zara, Sephora, etc. I think the segment that it's attractive to or the use cases, it's just not wide enough. So I think that's why those two haven't necessarily taken off. That being said, I don't see why you couldn't have the optionality of it there if you have the right partner. So, you have your in-store payments, whether it's with a terminal, mobile POS, whatever. And when you have these type of Black Friday, White Friday, Yellow Friday, whatever you have, you could maybe use something like that to tackle those things. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason. But I think, going back to that point of the experience, I think merchants are starting to realize that, payments does play into the experience in the store, especially for brands which are, maybe not necessarily luxury, but upper market. Because their whole USP is you come into the store and you feel quite exclusive for it. If you go there and there's 20 people and no one really to talk to you, to show you the product, to show you around, you feel why am I paying this extra price? And that's a lot of the conversations we have sometimes with merchants to say, hey, how do we bring that back? Whether it's with tap to pay or whether it's with mobile POS, how can your sales executives walk around and give that experience and not have these huge queues to take away from that luxury feel?
Okay. The other area which we had started seeing traction, and we still see some level of traction, was the ability to use data or the payments data to help refine your, whether it's your trade marketing strategies, it's your pricing strategies, so on and so forth. Have you actually seen any genuine evolution among the merchant body in their ability to ingest that data or digest that data and turn it into knowledgeable action? Or is it still a whole lot of reports which are just sent up and down?
No, I think, well, we see both. Not to plug Adyen too much, but we see both. Where we do see these reports, which are just a ton of data and kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
What we do provide is a unified view, as I'm sure you discussed with Roulant and have an idea. But when you have a retailer who's online and offline, they rarely have a view of an online customer coming in store and making a payment, which actually is quite strange in this day and age. You think like, oh, that's a big gap, but that is the case. And we can give them that unified view. They can have like a customer DNA, that they can follow and they can see the trends. They could see someone looking online at something, maybe something higher value, and they can see that they never check out for higher value goods. But then you see they go in store. So straight away, that this person has a characteristic that they don't want to buy something that's like above a certain price. And therefore, you can then identify, these are my customers that have this behavior. And when they have certain sales or promotions, they can market to those type of customers to encourage either coming to store, because maybe there's a discount or there's some kind of limited offer, or there's a high enough discount online that might tip them into buying online rather than abandoning the basket and maybe coming to the store. So there's definitely use cases that we've seen,
and you're seeing merchants really use that data now.
Not enough,
right?
Not enough. Because
if I may ask, why do you think that's the case? Is it just because they're not trained? They just don't have the habit to?
Yeah.
Is it a capability gap? Is it that they don't trust that data? They feel it's not wide enough?
Yeah, it's probably a combination, right? For some merchants, it is a bit overwhelming, and it's also like we also have to be empathetic, right? A merchant, if you put yourself in a merchant's position, their sole job is not to optimize payments. Like, you just have to get that. So if you lead the conversation, oh, big data, we can do this, we can do that, you could sometimes risk that you're 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of where they are. They may just want to be able to transact quicker, or to have a nicer terminal, or whatever. So I think there's definitely like a little bit of an overwhelm, and I think the market does need to, or will mature over time. But also, habits are different in the UAE. People do like going to stores. And so maybe the need to have this data hasn't been that great, because at the end of the day, if you're a big electronics retailer or clothing brand, you have plenty of people coming into your store because you're in all the big malls. And as we said, malls are popular. So they might not feel there's that demand. And I think we're always in a discussion with them to say, okay, what you do is good, but could it be better? That's always kind of the question. And it's just about quantifying, what does better mean? And is it worth my time and my resources and my roadmap and putting this in front of this, and actually like saying, okay, let's focus on this.
No, I agree with you, right? So whatever it's worth, and this is not for me to actually preach here. I think what we realized was, or at least my mantra was always that treat payments as a part of commerce.
Yeah.
Right. And therefore it'll allow you to make payments invisible. I don't really care whether the person comes online, offline, or it's a hybrid customer. At the end of the day, that customer needs to be serviced. And I think the real value of data, which was coming out of either our loyalty programs or our payment data, was 2 or 3-fold. How do you reduce your cost of customer acquisition?
Yeah.
Right, which itself is, I think, a big challenge. How do you not over discount? Because there was always this habit. There's a herd mentality towards discounting well beyond just the Fridays and the Thursdays.
Yeah.
I'm talking about. And the third was, are you actually seeing the necessary return on the marketing effort that you're making, because they're carte blanche programs? I think, and what we started seeing with some of the brands which are within our stable, and there was quite a few of them, I think the merchants who were able to take that attitude were able to then use that data because they weren't overwhelmed. They didn't see things differently.
Yeah.
In any case, you made a point earlier, which I wanted to come back to, where you said, a number of alternative form factors is slowly and steadily, capturing the people's imagination, right?
Yeah.
There's cash, there's cards, swiping, there's contactless cards, there's Apple Pays and Samsung Pays. Soon enough, there are prepaid cards, closed and open loop ones. Soon enough, we'll have other forms of digital currencies, which we want to pay for. Now, that creates two kinds of interesting dimensions. On the merchant side, there's this concept of payment orchestration, right? Which is capturing people's imagination. And obviously, I'm going to dwell deep. And the other is, if you take it from a consumer perspective, there's even more complication in terms of channel of choice, right? The time they like to transact, right? They might start their journey, as you said very correctly, online, and they might end the journey in store because they do their sort of initial shopping, and then they don't want to stand in the shop for too long. They just go in, they pick up what they want, and they go out, right? So let's deconstruct payment orchestration a little bit. So I'm going to ask you to sort of educate the people listening in.
Yeah.
When I use the word payment orchestration, what does that mean in your terms, Adyen terms?
Yeah, so payment orchestration is usually a layer that sits between a merchant and all of the different third parties within a payments ecosystem. The big kind of challenge that Adyen set out to change or to disrupt at the beginning was, let's take all these parts of the payment and let's bring them all under one partner. And that's what Adyen does. It takes care of the gateway, the acquiring, it controls the risk, the fraud, everything. So you just partner with one. Orchestrations go an extra layer. They obviously put hundreds of payment methods, hundreds of different providers, depending on which part of the region you're in, and then gives one point of contact or one interface that a merchant would be able to then use. And the biggest benefit, that we historically have seen is that authorization rates are increased, through things like smart routing, which basically means if you think of a payment coming through, it gets processed at your terminal, and then when it goes into the orchestration platform, they say, okay, this is the time of day, this is the time of month, this time of year, whatever, and the uptime of these different providers, all in like a split second, and says, okay, this payment's going to go here, or it goes here, or it goes here. And what the merchant sees is an uplift in their authorization rate. So it's quite attractive on paper. A lot of big merchants build their own orchestration platforms. So it's not something that's like super new. It's just something that's become more accessible to businesses who maybe don't have the same size of technical team that a Spotify or a Netflix has, where they can just sign up with one partner. They can select which methods they want or which providers they want in the background, and off they go.
So let me ask you a question. It's a very interesting plate, right? So orchestration on e-commerce has existed for quite a few years, and as you mentioned, a few names, those guys have been doing it for a while, right? Orchestration on offline is harder.
Yeah.
Right. It's harder. It's slightly more complex. It hasn't existed for that long. If I bring it to this part of the world, do you think the merchants are now starting to talk to you as Adyen about the need for them to have orchestration in their sort of, I may say, offline world?
Yeah.
Right. And if so, how does that actually impact Adyen's proposition in the market?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a huge demand.
Okay.
Reason being is that offline payments authorization is usually not as big an issue as online. Yeah. But we have come across certain brands, surprising brands, I would say, because like on the front of them, they are maybe not selling the most exotic product or like, innovative things, but they're big, they process a lot of transactions, and there is a demand. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I've come across that a lot. And that might change, but I think the very nature of offline payments is that authorization rates are typically pretty high. And that is usually one of the key things that an orchestration platform would help to uplift.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Let me switch gears. Let's talk a little bit about Adyen in the market. You've been now in the UAE for 5 years?
5 years.
5 years, right? And
longer actually, because technically we had our first customer here in 2014. Yeah, but physically, about 5 years.
5 years, yes. Yeah. So, and your initial focus, if I remember, was predominantly online?
No, because even then we had a unified commerce offering. Yeah, which means that we are able to process payments online and offline through our terminals. So that was there from day one.
Right.
You could argue, we were a little bit more well-known in e-commerce, or maybe the way that the brand was perceived, that it's very kind of online. But at the point of entry into the UAE, unified commerce and the in-person payments was already something that was around for a number of years. Yeah.
So going forward in the UAE, what do you see as the areas of focus? Without you having to tell us your entire strategy, right? But so how do you see actually this whole payments world evolve from your lens in terms of what Adyen's strategy is? And then I'm very interested to hear a little bit of an angle that you guys have said was that you are looking from the Middle East to work with some of the large markets which are in the wider, if I might say, Asian region, right? Yeah. But let's have that as a second. Firstly, a little bit more about the UAE.
Yeah, I think our strategy is to, well, first of all, our approach is very long term. So we are really looking for merchants who are thinking about implementing something that's going to be long term. So client product fit is a big thing for us. And so digital first companies are an obvious choice because they really enjoy the simplicity of the technology we offer. They really get the value proposition. But then there's also, I would categorize kind of as where we can improve experiences. So hospitality is a key one, right? Because it's actually quite a complex flow. There's a lot that's happening. You're checking in, you're paying, there's pre-authorization. Pre-authorization gets reached, another authorization happens. There's a mini bar. There's so many steps. And that's really where our platform comes in. Back to that whole unified commerce piece is that, you can see your customer transacting in all different aspects within your ecosystem, online, offline. So I think that's definitely an area that we are focusing a lot on because it also ties into experience. So, we're present at Aquaventure. And it goes back to my point of what I was saying, sometimes payments is quite, it's just A to B, someone makes a margin. It's actually, one of those things that, you almost like don't want to talk about it in that way. But what was really cool is you take it back a little bit and you think, okay, I go to Aquaventure with my family. There's two ways that this day could go. Let's say I'm handling cash or cards or whatever, I'm giving cash to my kids. It goes in their pocket. It gets wet. It's out. My wife's upset because we've lost 200 dirhams, or my son goes off with 100 dirhams and buys 100 dirhams worth of ice cream when I said he should just get lunch. It sounds silly, but that then turns into a bad experience at the end of the day. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to Aquaventure. But because we have created a solution where there's a wristband, for example, when you come in, you top up the wristband, you give everyone within the family or your group a wristband. If you're with kids, you can tell them, okay, you can spend 50 dirhams, you can spend it here, here, here. That's it. Off you go. Enjoy. And what that comes back to is at the end of the day, everyone's had a good time, had a good experience. And I think this is also what we're trying to tap in with a lot of merchants. Some really cool stuff that's happening with hospitality is the check-in experience. We all know what it's like. If you think about it, it's actually not great. Like you fly, you take it to cab, you arrive at your hotel, you stand in a queue. I just want to get to my room. So there's really cool initiatives which we're looking at where you can do your check-in online. You could even use your phone to get into your hotel. Yep. Maybe there's kiosks. And all of that ties back into experience. If I arrive in Dubai and I see the Jumeirah hotel stand, when we come out of the airport, and between there and the hotel, I'm already checked in and I can use my phone, or they've activated a card because my credit card was recognized as a customer. I can go there and boom, I'm in my room. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're trying to get merchants to understand. So I think that's more of like a old school industry, which we're trying to innovate in. And then there's a lot of cool stuff with. But
let me ask you a question there, right?
Brands.
Because so I used to have a bugbear with that, right?
Okay. With the hotel check-in?
No, not hotel check-in, right? So most payment companies, and no names to be taken, would turn around and say, let us tell you about, how you can make the customer experience better or the customer journeys better. But they had no demonstrable track record demonstrable expertise in understanding how I operated, let's say, a furniture company, right? Or how I ran an automotive showroom, right? Or how I ran a travel agency, right? So are you guys investing a serious amount of, I guess, effort in hiring people who come from different industries, who actually really understand? And I say this because I've actually had to walk people out of my offices who've tried to come and tell someone who runs an F&B outlet on what's the right thing for him to do or her to do in running F&B. And when I've asked some very basic question in terms of, do you really actually understand how F&B companies make money? Their answers are, well, that's a strange question to ask, Arjun. So give me the answer. So how are you fixing that sort of gap in knowledge?
Look, I think that's always the challenge, right? When you have having a good product and working at a company like Adyen, it's a double-edged sword. Okay. Because the product is great because you work there and you see it work, and we have all these amazing use cases. And sometimes you can fall into the trap of, here are the use cases I know are amazing. And instead of listening to the customer, you're just trying to give them one of these amazing use cases because you think it fits best. So I think it's definitely a trap that commercial people can fall into. So what do? I mean, one thing is, we really challenge each other at every part of the sales process to check certain criteria that are we actually on track to give this client value? Have we validated what we think is the truth to actually be the truth? And doing that at different stages. That without any specialism. Then back to your point, 100%, we do look at people who do have certain specialisms, but that's not always, I think, a very straightforward route, because they may have a good knowledge of the industry, but it's still difficult to connect where payments can fit into that. So I think there are challenges, but checking in on the process to see how we're doing and how we actually validated information is the key thing with the people that are in the decision-making power. So these are some of the things that we
and I do appreciate it, and I think it is a challenge. It's not one fix, but I think one thing I can tell you is that I think the payment charges go out of the window from a merchant's mindset if you start solving his problems. 100%. Right? Yeah. Because then he's not bothered about 20 bips on the interchange.
Bigger.
Exactly, because for him or her, you've solved the customer journey. As I keep going, you've either solved their CAC issue or they've resolved their authorization things and so on and so forth. And I think the more payment companies start to appreciate that, I think it becomes easier. And that's what's going to lead me to the next question, which is, you've got this sort of growth of social commerce, right? So again, I'm going to ask you two-part question here is, firstly, how big a trend is social commerce, right? We read a lot about it. You experience it firsthand, right? Specifically in this region. I hear that TikTok shops in the US has just, gone through the roof in the sense.
Which is hilarious because it's actually just QVC.
True. But that's the funny thing about a lot of this stuff. 20 years later, it's all back. It's like bell bottoms, right? Hold on to your bell bottoms long enough and they'll be back in fashion, right? But how big a social commerce, and what, if any, implications does that have, right, to players like Adyen and others in terms of having to realign and re-engineer the way you engage with the client, the way you sell your platform or your products?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, the products we offer fit into social commerce because, whether it's payment links, whether it's actually putting in a checkout experience or anything like that, it's already available. If there's something new that needs to come in, I think the way that we always look at it is, can it apply to other use cases? Because, one of the parts of the Adyen formula is we build for the good of all merchants rather than one. That sounds very Hollywood, but it's a simple methodology of just keeping things simple, not overcomplicating the platform. But I think the really cool thing with social commerce, and the thing that probably most merchants are trying to tap into most is personalization. Personalization when it's online, offline can sometimes be a bit more trickier. But when you think about social commerce, like, hey, you've got their profile, you're seeing their activity, and you can kind of marry two very cool data sets of like, I know what this person is looking at, or the social platform knows what this person is looking at. And then they can connect that to, okay, you're looking at something. I know you have high intent. Let's make the payment really easy. And that's what I love, like, for example, for Instagram Shop. It becomes like a much more interesting way to shop. And then if you can just click the picture, see a payment option and go, it's so good for conversion. So I think that's really the most like cool thing about the social commerce space is that you can marry two very nice data sets to make personalization like just massive.
Okay. Personalization will lead to AI soon enough. But before I actually come to AI, you did mention a couple of things, and I'm sorry, I forgot to ask this question. You mentioned two very interesting trends, which is one was wallets, right, and whether it's Apple Pay, I think in this part of the world, Apple Pay dominates hugely, right, hugely, and with Apple Pay now opening up its platform for others to sort of play on it, I guess it becomes stickier, right. So we'd be very keen to hear about. Not necessarily, why have wallets been adopted? I guess that's an extension of the contactless and the ease of payment. Yeah. But what does it really mean in terms of, Apple Pay opening up its, if I may say, opening up its technology for players to actually build their own products on top of Apple Pay? What implications does that hold for players like Adyen? And then the second part, which is around buy now, pay later, right? And buy now, pay later is a funny thing where it initially got introduced very much as an extended payment product, right? It was, and in all intents and purposes, you could sort of say it is that. It's about, paying in installments rather. But then people are like, no, it's actually a credit product. Someone's actually getting credit because you're paying over a significant amount of time, right? And the growth of BNPL was interesting because there were enough naysayers here who basically said that this is not going to survive. Now we see BNPL in a number of variants across number of sectors, including B2B payments. So both parts of the questions. Where do you think this whole wallet stuff goes next, and the implications it has for you, and how do you see BNPL evolve? And do you see players like Adyen, and I'm not putting you on the spot, not just offer BNPL, which is through third parties, but actually get into the BNPL game themselves to a certain extent?
Yeah. I think one really interesting thing about wallets in this part of the world, in comparison to Europe, I'll use the UK as example because I know it is the surprising thing that we saw is how much people are willing to spend per transaction.
Limits, right?
Just double click, tap, done. Yeah. Enormous. Like, hundreds of thousands of dirhams.
I remember.
in a double click, Face ID, boom, 600K. Yeah. Like, wow. Like, people actually want to pay these type of things with card. And the reason I mention it is because these are the kind of like really interesting nuances to understand about a market, because then you start to think like where your product can fit, because you could look at an industry and say, no one's going to pay those amounts with this with Apple Pay, with Google Pay, but you'd be wrong. And we discovered that, and that's a really interesting part of the verticals we're looking at, or which verticals we are looking at.
It makes a difference towards the way you manage fraud. It makes a difference in the way you're routing your payments, because it was unprecedented. I remember when it launched here, I went back to the UK and I tried to make a 50 quid transaction, and it just kept bouncing off, and I was like, why is it bouncing off? It's only like whatever 50 quid is, like 400 dirhams, right? 200 dirhams, something like that, right? 220. And I was like, what's going on? And 5 days before that, I had just transacted whatever 3,000-4,000. I paid my kids' school fees, right, on a single transaction. So, so what does that really mean then? Then how does it manifest for yourself? How do you then adapt your platform? Because one of Adyen's philosophy is this single platform approach, right? So how do you continue to sort of, if I may say, indigenize or localize this platform for these nuances?
Well, I think a lot of the the way that the platform is used is quite similar across markets. You know, okay, we're talking about different values maybe, but you know, we have, let's say, a very extensive fraud engine. So when it comes to higher transactions, you know, we are well placed to be able to process them without adding additional risk to ourselves from a transaction monitoring perspective and so on. So I don't think that there is a huge amount of localization outside of like getting onto the right local payment methods. And I think that's, again, part of the ethos for the platform, is to keep it very streamlined and similar across all those markets. The part around, you know, consumers wanting to do transactions with Apple Pay, for example, for high transactions, it's two-sided. One is that consumers want to gain things like points, which leads to loyalty and the power of loyalty, or you know, certain cashbacks or whatever for cards. And the other is that merchants want to get their money very quickly. You know? And so in some industries where transactions are happening at a higher level, they are happy to
wait a bit longer.
Maybe not happy, but they are willing to pay extra for the ability to have that money available to them quicker, basically giving the consumer the easiest way to pay, so they have the ability to have that cash on hand.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And what's your view on BNPL then?
I think BNPL is really interesting. You know, when it first came out, I just thought, you know, what's the point? Like, you know, what is the point? But then what happens is you start to use it. And I think it's like almost like a psychological thing. You know, you don't feel the same level of guilt when you buy a pair of shoes or some clothing or whatever it is that's, you know, in a single amount is quite steep, and you think, oh, you know, how do I fit that into my budget? Blah, blah, blah. But when you have the option of, oh, it's actually, you know, divided by 4, well, that's a nicer number. I can do that every month. It's like a psychological thing. And so now we've seen it obviously like boom massively. And the other thing that was super surprising with BNPL is that I think a lot of people were thinking like, oh, this is a Gen Z thing or a Gen this. But now we know the spectrum is wide. And why? Because it goes back to your point. It's ultimately, you know, I think it's a credit product, and we're all very used to credit. And in this instance, you know, someone who's 18 and someone who's 50 are happy to use it because, yeah, they're comfortable with the way it works.
For me, I think, you know, a lot of people in the credit market and the consumer credit market don't actually fully grasp the challenge of what I call the liquidity gap, right? They look at funding gap, right? They don't look at liquidity gap. And the issue here with liquidity is you're paid usually once a month. Your expenses are every day, right? So there are times of the month, if I may say, where you're illiquid, right? And I think BNPL actually solved. So I'm not giving any kudos to me and my team, but when we actually saw Tabby come around, and then Tamara soon after that, we jumped at it with our merchants because we said, you know something, as you said correctly, here's a market in the UAE, everybody has a credit card. The credit card companies were too busy making their 40% APRs, right? And so wanted people to revolve, well unfortunately,
No need to innovate.
Right, huh?
No need to innovate.
No need to innovate. And they had EPP. They had EPP for, I don't know, for a decade before BNPL came around. But here was BNPL, which covered a bigger market, so it covered everybody. So it was credit on your debit card in a roundabout manner, if you want to say it, right? And it allowed you, you know, allowed small transactions to go through because you couldn't make the 10,000, the 15,000 dirham transactions, but you could make the 1,500 dirham transaction at 1,000. And it was spread over 4 installments, which was, you know, long enough, but not that long. So we basically said huge, and I'll be one of the categories we saw, and I can't name the merchant out here, they sold kitchens. We actually saw a 20% jump, not necessarily in the number of kitchens we sold, because it's not like people start changing kitchens just for the sake of it, but the value, the average transaction value of the kitchen went up 20% because people were able to buy that one little item more on their kitchen, right? Which they wouldn't have otherwise because they would have had to pay at the end of the month because they didn't necessarily want to revolve at 40% APRs. So I do think it is. So do you guys see... And you power BNPL, right? You have all the BNPL platforms on it. Do you see payment players get into the BNPL game at all themselves, or do you think they see themselves as facilitators?
I guess it depends. You asked the question. You said would Adyen move into that space? And hey, look, in other markets, we do have a funding product, which is more like I guess credit line type thing for businesses rather than a BNPL.
Yeah, I know you do. Yes,
but it is very possible. I think you just need to have the balance sheet and the right way to assess the risk. And I think there's that trade-off because, okay, if I'm a payments company, I could create a BNPL product. I could build everything, but do I really need to? That's the question mark I think that most would ask. And when you have such big established players in a market already, unless there's like a really great commercial incentive, I feel like partnering is the better route for them. But it's not to say never. I think it's very possible.
And I agree with you. And I think that brings me to my next question is obviously, I've had several conversations with Adyen. I've been on the other side as a customer of Adyen. So, I have a little bit of understanding. It was a while ago. But how do you take, and if I take the local market, how do you see, you becoming a part of a bigger ecosystem, collaborations, partnerships? How important are those from your perspective? And maybe you can just take a wider payments perspective. I don't have to put you on the spot and say it's Adyen's view. To be sort of, competitive in this game, because let's be honest, payments it's a hyper competitive market, right?
Yeah.
So how important is these coalitions, collaborations, ecosystems going to be going forward?
Yeah.
And where do you think you will collaborate more and less?
Yeah. Well, I think it's massive. Like you said, it's hyper competitive. If you think you can do this solo, I don't think that's the strategy to go. And I think, that's my personal view, even in my previous roles. A partnership network, an introducer network, whatever you want to call it, for me, it was a no-brainer. Within enterprise sales, it's honestly a must. So we do partner a lot. When we look at a new vertical or a new space, after identifying that and maybe who's the champion of that within the team, the next thing is what partners do we need and how do we find out? Because I think we have our own statistics where any deal that has partnerships involved has a 50% chance of converting rather than I can't remember the number, but let's say 15, 20, whatever it is. It jumps up a lot because it goes back to what you said. You start solving issues for the merchant instead of telling the merchant and to take a big merchant, an oil tanker of a merchant. You have to go that way. It's like instead you say, oh, actually, we go that direction, but we integrate with XYZ or we partner with XYZ. It's a really powerful approach. So for me, it's something we'll continue to do. And I think within this market, we already have a lot of partners for the verticals that we work with. But going into next year, we have some new verticals we'll be looking at, which we don't have partners. And so we'll actively go out and get those relationships because they're super valuable. And in the UAE, the really interesting thing about this market is like, it's still a very word of mouth type of market in a way. It's very visual. So, if I see you, I'm kind of more interested in speaking to you. Being digital only can sometimes be quite challenging. Also quite challenging for Adyen because it's, I think for a long time, it's enjoyed this kind of image of, we process everyone's payments, but you don't see us. But I think, we, especially in this market, we need to be more visible and we need to share the successes that we're having because I think that helps other merchants to, basically be interested in having a chat with us because we have a lot of great success stories. Are we sharing them enough? I would say no. And I think that's another big part that I would like to do. But that goes back to that point of, yes, we want to have partners. We want people to be comfortable about us and not feel that
amplifies the message.
Yeah, that we're just here. You know, we're a European company that's just here to service a couple of clients and that's it. No, it's not. You know, yes, we do have a methodology of bringing large merchants into markets, global merchants into markets. But when the market is as vibrant as this, you know, and there's plenty of players we want to work with that are local.
Yeah, and it's vibrant and it's dynamic. It's interesting you say what you say. So I'm just going to coin this sentence. So as payments get more invisible, payment providers need to get more visible.
100%.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's the summary of what you're trying to say.
100%,
and I totally agree with you, because otherwise everything gets invisible. And so therefore the last man standing gets most of the business, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing.
No, exactly.
Right. I agree. I totally agree. We talked a little bit about the wider region.
Yeah.
And there's something interesting that you're starting to do with this sort of huge, massive country, which is a few hours to the east. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about it, please.
Yeah. So, you know, a couple of years ago, the business decided that India would be a market where, you know, we are going to invest in for the next 10, 15, 20 years growth, which, you know, on paper, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, right? It's a huge market. What's obviously amazing about India is that the payment infrastructure and how comfortable people are with digital payments is very advanced.
It's incredible what UPI has achieved with NPCI.
Yeah, exactly. Is incredible. And I think going back to how the UAE can support this is that, look, we know the UAE is a really interesting market. There are a lot of amazing merchants, but it's not 1 billion people, right? And unfortunately, the land mass will not allow it to get to 1 billion people. So an interesting part that I would like us to do over the next couple of years is support the growth of India. And I was having a discussion with our country manager in India, and we were formulating this plan. And I asked the question. I said, hey, but like, do Indian merchants want to come into the UAE? Why do you leave a market of 1 billion people to come into a market of 8-9 million people? And he said, no, for sure, because the margins are very different, and it's multiplies the population, because you can charge 5, 10, 20 times more for a product. And then on top of that, Indian businesses with global ambitions, which will continue to grow, can use the UAE. As we know, the UAE is an amazing...
As a springboard.
Exactly. Central point to go into all parts of the world. So I think it's super exciting. And then the last point is that the merchants are sophisticated. They see the value that payments can bring. You don't have to really bring them up to speed. Hey, they know it. And so there's some really interesting use cases that we're already working on. And I think that could be, a really nice play for us to be able to support that growth for that market, which I think is super exciting.
And I think the timing is perfect in a lot of ways, because I think there's a lot there's a lot you can learn from the other side of the market. We've obviously heard NPCI is now working with Al Ittihad Payments on I guess the domestic scheme, and I think they with Brazil are the poster childs for account-to-account payment or faster
Everyone's
payment,
chasing
instant payment. So I think I think it is an interesting collaboration, if I may use that term, and so on and so forth. So I know I've kept you on the chair for a while. One last question.
Yeah.
What do you see as the big challenges for 2025 for the entire payment sector in the UAE?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is that really understanding for merchants to really understand the value of payments. I think there's still a lot of old style thinking. And I think that some businesses will get caught out because other businesses are already thinking about it. I think, payment companies also need to think about how they position themselves when it comes to account-to-account transfers, which is something that's going to be happening in the UAE. And then, the challenge of digital currencies. I think it's still quite early, but with the UAE, things can move so quick. So I think these are a couple of the things that are challenging. But at least I would say some of the really awesome things that have been happening is that the regulator has been really fostering the innovation of payments within the UAE. We've seen the RPSCS framework being released for acquiring. We have recently seen the change in interchange pricing. All of this is going to help drive innovation, and consumers are driving it from their side, and the regulators are basically saying, yep, we support this, and here are the things that we're doing. So there are challenges, of course, there always will be. It's payments, as you say, it's hyper competitive, and it will continue to be. But I think it's also a pretty awesome foundation to build on. So yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think 2025 is going to be as interesting as a year as 2024 was, or as 2023 was, right? I think payments will continue to disrupt. I love the fact that there's so much sort of embedding of payments which is going on. We talked a lot about it. I think there's convergence between payments and commerce, of all sorts of commerce. Yeah. We didn't get time to talk about AI commerce, but we'll save that for the next discussion, because I think we're maybe a little bit away from there. There's all this stuff happening with agentic AI and autonomous AI and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot ahead of us. I also think that I'm very, very keen to see what this consolidation between Network International and Magnati, how that's going to play out, because I'm sure that's going to have a role to play, because I think between the two of them, they'll consolidate nearly 60 to 70% of the acquiring market. Your job's cut out for you, as they say.
It is. The amount of times in the first 2 months that I've heard, you've got big shoes to fill is a lot. But I think, it's that is kind of the part that I'm enjoying the most, or look forward to the most. Like, I'm 35 years old. I'm not here to have a very relaxing time. I do want to challenge, and I do want to look back and see, like, oh, okay, actually, we made a dent, we made an impact on stuff. And yeah, there is a lot of work, but should be good.
No, I think, and you have an awesome backing. Your Adyen continues to impress globally. Yeah. So I think you're not sort of on your own.
I'm not alone. Yeah, absolutely.
You're not on your own. Yeah. Daumantas, thanks a lot for coming in.
Pleasure.
I'm sure we will talk more, and our paths will cross again. I need to come back to your offices and see your new offices. I haven't done that, so maybe that'll be a good excuse to come back and say hello to you.
We could do an interview there, or an interview or podcast.
Yeah, no, we'll just come for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, right. Coffee and a view.
There is so many podcasts that let's not do another one. Right? No, thank you for coming in. Right? All right, appreciate it.
Sounds good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Daumantas. He's the new head of the Middle East region with Adyen. He started 3 months ago. Obviously, he said he's got big shoes to fill. I guess there's an exciting market ahead of him, with lots to change. So with that, I'll say goodbye till next week. I'll see you then. Thank you.